Chapter 4. Alone in her tower prison, Alice was waiting for the moon to set. She judged that there was still an hour to go and set about making her simple preparations. She lit the oil lamp, keeping the wick as low as possible. She had already placed a rolled-up blanket along the bottom of the door to prevent any light being seen by the guards in the room outside. When the little flame settled and burnt steadily, she concealed it beneath one of Lady Gwendolyn's ridiculous conical hats. "I knew I'd find a use for these stupid things," she muttered to herself. Earlier in the day, Alice's belongings had been returned to her, after they'd been searched, of course. Consequently, she had changed back into her own simple, elegant white gown, forsaking the ornate fashions that were suited to her false identity. She was glad to be wearing her own clothes again, glad to throw off the identity of the airheaded Lady Gwendolyn. She was also relieved to find that her writing satchel, with sheets of parchment, pen and ink, and graphite chalks, was in her baggage as well. She pulled the heavy curtain back and set the lamp on the floor below the window, tossing the tall hat to one side. She set herself to search the darkness outside, concentrating particularly on the irregular line that marked where the black mass of the forest began. For the moment, there was no sign of any reply to the signals she had been sending for the past 2 nights. But she had been schooled in patience, and she waited and watched calmly. Sooner or later, she knew, Will would try to make contact again. As she waited, she thought back over events of the past few days. Since the attempt to rescue her, Keren had submitted her to one more interrogation session, using the blue gemstone to hypnotize her and see if there were any further secrets that she was hiding. It rapidly became obvious that there were none. At least, none that he thought to ask her about. That was the one shortcoming of hypnotism. Alice would answer freely any questions he asked, unable to hide facts or lie to him. But she would not offer information unless she was prompted. Consequently, in answer to his questions, she had told him all about how Will and she had been assigned to investigate the rumours of sorcery in Norgate Fife, and the mysterious illness that had struck down its commander, Lord Siron. She had also revealed the fact that Will was a ranger, not a jongleur. Under normal circumstances, Alice would have been aghast that she had revealed secrets like these. But, of course, she was telling Keren little that he didn't already know. And as Will had told her when he had scaled the tower wall a few days previously, nothing she said to Keren could do them any harm now. Aside from his determination to rescue her, she had no detailed knowledge of Will's plans. In a show of defiance, she had told Keren that Will would certainly have sent word to Castle Norgate by now, so that authorities there could raise a force to come and attack Macindaw. She was puzzled by the fact that Keren dismissed this as unimportant. Since Alice only responded to direct questions when she was hypnotized, she had made no mention of the fact that the leather-covered glass bottle of acid that Will had used to cut through the bars on her window was concealed in the wardrobe. The bars had been replaced, of course, and she had told Keren that Will had used acid. But the renegade knight assumed Will had taken it with him. There was no way for him to know that on the night of the escape attempt, Alice had unthinkingly placed the bottle on top of the window frame. The following day, she had remembered it was there and secreted it in the little wardrobe that completed the furnishing of her prison. Bed, table, 2 chairs, and a wardrobe. It certainly wasn't luxurious, but it could have been a whole lot worse. As for the acid, there would come a time when it might be useful, she thought. Her eyes began to water with the strain of peering into the half-light outside the tower. She stepped away for a few seconds, rubbed them, blinked away the traces of tears, and then set herself to watch once more. When the moon set, she would begin her signalling. Will was concentrating, the tip of his tongue protruding at the corner of his mouth as he encoded his message to Alice. The dog lay under the table, and he rested his bare feet on her warm fur. From time to time she grumbled contentedly, as dogs do. He glanced down at her, smiling. "Nice of you to spend some time with me," he said. "Where's your new friend?" Her new friend was Trobar, the massively built, misshapen giant who was one of Mallkallam's most faithful followers. The dog and Trobar had struck up an instant friendship. The giant had lavished her with all the pent-up affection of someone who had spent years with no person or creature to love. The dog sensed his need and reciprocated, spending hours each day in his company. At first, Will had been a little jealous. Then he realized how important the companionship was to Trobar, and felt a little mean-spirited. The dog, he thought, was wiser and more kindly natured than he was. He was working on Mallkallam's table, and he glanced up as the healer entered the room. Mallkallam looked with interest at the sheets of paper covered with letters and numbers. On one sheet, Will had written the message he wanted to send. On the second, he had translated the letters into code. He saw Mallkallam's interest and, trying to seem casual, turned the original page face down. The courier's code, known to the diplomatic service and the Ranger Corps, was a jealously guarded secret. But it was actually quite simple, and he didn't want to give Mallkallam, ally though he might be, any chance to figure it out. Mallkallam smiled as he saw the gesture. As a matter of fact, he had been trying to get a glimpse. If he could see the original message, alongside the cipher version, he felt confident he could unravel the format of the code. The young man at the table was no fool, he reflected. "Moonset in an hour or so," he said. Will nodded. "We'll get going soon. I'm nearly finished." "You send your message using a lamp, I take it?" Mallkallam asked. "That's right. It's only short because there's not a lot to tell her at the moment. It's just to let her know that we're watching and to set up a schedule for further messages." The healer laid another sheet of paper on the table, along with a small, black, shiny pebble. "Is there any way we could get this to her?" he asked. "I mean, could you tie it to an arrow and shoot it through the window? Something like that?" Will shook his head and reached for his quiver. Mallkallam had noticed that the young ranger's weapons were always within easy reach. "That's not a very reliable method. If you tie something to an arrow, it tends to fall off when you shoot it," he said. "We'll do it a little differently." He slid an unusual-looking arrow from the quiver and placed it on the table. Instead of the usual razor-sharp broadhead at its tip, it had an extended cylinder. Mallkallam examined it curiously. The cylinder was hollow. A threaded cap, surmounted by a rounded lead weight, screwed onto the end to seal it. "You put the written message in here?" he guessed, and Will nodded again. He leaned back to ease his cramped shoulder and neck muscles. He had been hunched at the table for some time, initially writing out a chart of the code, then the message, than the code itself. As he moved, the dog stirred. Her tail thumped the floor. That's right. I could use the lamp message to warn Alice to get out of the way, then fire the arrow through her window. Easy as that? Mallkallam smiled. Will raised one eyebrow. Easy as that, if you've spent 5 years learning to put arrows exactly where you want them. And the stone? Mallkallam said. Could you put that inside as well? Will picked up the little black pebble and weighed it experimentally in his hand. I don't see why not. I'll have to reduce the lead to compensate for the extra weight and to make sure the arrow remains balanced. I assume you have some scales I could use. Of course, they're basic tools of a healer's trade. The question is, Will continued, why am I shooting a stone through her window in the first place? Ah, yes, said the healer, placing one finger alongside his nose. I wondered when you'd ask that. It's to help her if Keren tries to mesmerize her again. That gained Will's interest immediately. He looked at the stone again, examining it more carefully. But there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about it. He frowned. What does it do? He asked. Mallkallam gently took the stone from his hand and held it up, admiring its deep sheen. It will neutralize the blue gemstone that she said Keren is using, he said. You see, mesmerism, or hypnotism as some people call it, is a matter of mental focus. Keren has created a situation where the blue gemstone focuses Alice's mind on his commands. But if she can hold this little pebble in her palm and concentrate on some kind of strong alternative image, she can resist that focus and remain in control of her own mind. If she's smart, Keren will never know she has broken his grip on her, and that could be useful. She might be able to tell him all sorts of misinformation. He handed the stone back to Will, who turned it over, looking to see if there was something about it that he'd missed. Other than its glossy black surface, he couldn't see anything special. How does it do that? He asked. It seemed a little like hocus pocus to him, but Alice had been very definite about the effect of Keren's blue gemstone. And when he had related the story to Mallkallam, the old healer had grasped the significance of the blue stone at once. Mallkallam shrugged now, in reply to Will's question. Nobody really knows. It's stellartite, you see, he said, as if that explained everything. Then, seeing the question on Will's lips, he continued, Starstone. It's all that remains of a falling star. I found it years ago. Stellartite is exceedingly valuable, probably because it has otherworldly properties. Anyway, he concluded, I don't really know how it works. I just know it does. He smiled. It's galling for a man of science to have to admit something like that, but what can I do? Will nodded, convinced. He looked at the sheet of paper Mallkallam had placed on the table. It contained a description of the stone and outlined its use, but the sheet was too bulky for the message arrow. He reached into his pack and produced a flimsy sheet of thin message paper. Then I'd best start rewriting your message, he said. While I'm doing that, perhaps you could weigh the pebble and the lead weight on the arrow. Mallkallam picked up the arrow and the pebble. Consider it done, he said, turning towards his little workroom at the back of the house.